Hi, this is Noah the Freelance Painter, and today's video series is going to be about turning all of this kind of old varnished ambered woodwork into paint grade. All the knotty pine is going to disappear and we're going to get a paint grade finish. And what that's going to do is really liven up the room. It's going to let the woodwork, the floating shelves and the cabinets back there really pop out, as well as all the art will pop out instead of just getting lost in just all of this distracting knotty pine. So that is what it's going to be about. I'm going to spray, but before I spray, I have to do a lot of masking. So I'll go through that next. A couple other quick notes on why I'm going to spray before I start masking everything. V-groove knotty pine, vertically oriented like this, or really any orientation, there's going to be gaps, right? And this is an old house, so theoretically there's not a ton of movement here, but there's going to be some. And when you spray this kind of thing, you can hit it from either side and just get the best coverage you're going to get on situations like this without clogging up these cracks, which if it does expand and contract a little bit could cause some break points. So you want to be really careful at how much you fill these. Ideally you're putting the thinnest coat possible here and just not leaving a liability behind when things inevitably start expanding and contracting. Another reason I want to spray here, things like this. There's a couple floating shelves, there's a nice even reveal across there, but imagine trying to like brush up in there. You couldn't do that neat of a job. It's much easier to mask that off and spray up into it and really get great coverage there. And last note, I gotta give myself a shout out here, because these floating shelves and the cabinets beneath were one of my first projects when I went out on my own back when I was 24, I think, in Invincible. I was billing myself as a carpenter and a painter and a finish carpenter and everything. So I did this job and I didn't make any money for sure, but I made a great client relationship and I'm back here half a decade later. So it's always about the relationship, remember that. And if you're 24, don't start promising that you can do everything, because you'll lose money. But here we are. I will be painting around them now. And this is my next step, masking. Okay, so everything is masked off in here. You can see I used a mix of light plastic on this stuff, paper on the shelves that are smaller, and some builder's paper on the floor, which you probably can't see. And I did a lot of that with the hand masker. This is an incredible tool. It is absolutely worth the money. I'm not going to do a review or a tutorial on that now because there are already way too many of those, but I will link to some of my favorites by the Idaho Painter in the corner if you do want to check those out. So regarding other prep that I did a quick once over with a fine sanding sponge, and I chose to use this instead of my Festool sanders because this wood has some texture to it. It has some wood grain that's you can feel bumps and ridges on it, and that's going to telegraph into the paint and look really nice. So I didn't want to knock those down with any sort of a hard pad sander. I wanted the sponge to absorb those, scuff, and float over. So I use that. Moving on to knots. So these particular clients are actually open to the idea that these knots will bleed through a little bit. They actually kind of want that. I'm not guaranteeing it because they are under layers of varnish and I could see them not bleeding through, but I'm not treating them because they said that to me. If I had clients that said, cover that up, we're sick of looking at them, no knots, I would be using Bin shellac-based primer to do a few coats on those before I primed them with before I primed everything with a bonding primer. So depending on the aesthetic you're going for at the end, depending on what color you're using, you may or may not want to treat your knots on a project like this. Speaking of primer, I'm going to use Extreme Bond to coat this. It's a really good bonding primer by Sherwin-Williams. I like it a lot. Stix is another really good one, S-T-I-X, and Fresh Start from Ben Moore would probably even work, although it's not technically a bonding primer, I don't think, but I have used it on sheeny surfaces before and it's done just fine. So I'm gonna bring the sprayer in, finish this last masking piece, and set it up and show you a little bit of spraying on this back wall here. Stay tuned. All right, so that wall is finally masked off. I actually did a zip wall on that one just so I can get in and out easily. My sprayer's in here. I'm using a Titan 440 airless for this. Yes, that is more of an exterior grade one, not a fine finishing one, but I'm asked to do a job like this once, maybe twice a year, where an HVLP would be handy. So I don't own one, and I know what I can do with this with the right products and the right tips, so this is what I'm doing for this one. Speaking of gun tips, RX80 Titan gun and fine finish tip 310. I'm using a 310 largely because a lot of the areas behind the camera are a lot smaller and I want to put out a smaller fan. It will be a little underpowered for this wall, but it's okay. I want to put a light coating on anyway, so I want that 10 orifice size. I don't want to be spewing out too much paint because the last thing you want is sags on a finish like this. Last thing, as far as like containment, deadfall, dust, filtration, I have everything perfectly contained in this room. Heating, ducts, everything's covered, nothing's coming in, nothing's coming out. Yes, this does produce dry fall, you know, spray dust, whatever you want to call it, but it's just going to exist in this room and then it's going to fall to the ground. And I do vacuum in between coats just to keep everything clean, and it's easy to do. I have done filters in the past, you know, like fans with furnace filters or a HEPA vac, you know, with things going out a window. I've created vented chambers before, and honestly, for something like this, it seems like overkill. So that is all of that. Everything's calibrated. I'm going to put my safety stuff on, and I'm going to do just this back wall so you can see how quick it goes. And then I'm going to get my camera out of here before it gets all dry dusty. So bear with me a second. Okay, that was part one that took me through prep into priming, and in part two I will start out by addressing those spray tip glitches you just saw me having, and then I will show you putting on the top coat and getting the whole room put back together. So check that out too. The link will be in the upper corner somewhere. Thanks again.